everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Now I Know My Rights, a channel and a platform dedicated on teaching you the importance of your rights. In today's presentation, we shall cover your top 10 basic rights when pulled over by the police. Over 20 million drivers are pulled over by the police across the US every year. The chances are it could happen to all of us at one time or another. A traffic stop leading to a ticket or a warning is all that it should be. After all, it has its name on it, a traffic stop. However, the moment a traffic stop escalates into something bigger and becomes a tool for criminal investigation, even if you think you are 100% innocent, even if you think you've done nothing wrong, it could lead to some charges based on violation of some unknown criminal codes that no one has ever heard of, and of course including the obvious ones: DUI, drug possession, drug distribution, or lying to the police charges. All of these charges will cost you a lot of money, time, humiliation, aggravation, and hassle to defend. Know your rights, use your rights, so you won't fall for the trap laid out by law enforcement. Trust me, it's in your hands, and you have the power not to allow a simple, routine traffic stop escalate into a criminal bust. You want to stay in traffic court. Traffic court is much better than criminal court. Without any further ado, let's start our today's presentation. The top 10 do's and don'ts when pulled over by the police. Like any other encounter with law enforcement, it's important that you don't react to the situation, but to respond to it. Anytime you react, it will be an emotional and irrational encounter which could work against you. But anytime that you respond to a situation, it will be a smart and calculated encounter which would work for you. The following is a step-by-step guide on what to expect and what to do when pulled over by the police. Rule number 1. Once you safely pull off the road, stay in your car with your seatbelt fastened. Turn off the radio or music. If you have any passengers, tell them to remain silent with their hands in plain view. Rule number 2. Roll down the window about halfway down, enough to communicate with the officer and enough to hand out documents. Through half opening, the officer can't look inside, nor can he smell alcohol or drugs. Rule number 3. Let the officer do all the talking. Don't engage in a friendly conversation. Don't chit-chat. Don't even start a casual conversation. Officers are trained to ask leading, deceiving, and entrapping questions. The most common questions are, "Do you know why I stopped you?" Reply, "No, I don't know, officer." "Do you know how fast you were going?" Reply, "I'm always a safe driver. I believe I was going with the flow of traffic." If the officer starts asking probing questions such as, "Where are you coming from?" or "Where are you going to?" don't say anything. He has no right and no business knowing it. Remember, anything you say is a confession and an admission on the officer's audio recording, including pleading with him and begging him to let you go. The smartest way to handle these line of questioning is to remain silent. Rule number 4. Don't argue with the officer. Many people start arguing their case with the officer. Don't. Trust me, it does you no good. The time to argue your case is in the court, not the roadside. The time to argue your case is in front of a judge, not with the officer. Rule number 5. How to handle requests for documents. Always follow instructions to give the officer your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. By law, you are required to have these while driving a car. At this point, the officer will go back to his car, run the license and registration, and will either let you go with a warning or will issue a citation. If the officer issues a citation, sign it and take the ticket. Your signature is not an admission of guilt. It's an acknowledgement of the ticket. You have plenty of opportunity to fight it and get it dismissed. Ideally, this is how a traffic stop should end. But in reality, some minor traffic stops turn into serious investigations, and unfortunately, it happens to racial minorities at a much higher rate. It's very important that you keep in mind that even if the initial reason for the stop is justified, police expansion of the stop may be illegal. Rule number 6. How to handle a request to step out of the car. The officer may order you and your passengers out of the car. You and your passengers have to comply. If the officer suspects that you or your passengers are armed, the officer can do a pat-down, which is a limited search to determine if you're armed. Once you step out of the car, roll up your window, lock the doors, and put the keys in your pocket. Rule number 7. How to handle a request for search. A search includes searching the inside and the trunk of your car, going into your pockets, your bag, your purse, any closed container, a cell phone, etc. The officer can only do a search if there is an illegal item in the car in his plain view, such as drugs or open containers of alcohol. Discovery of any illegal item in plain view often leads to a complete search. Another way the officer can legally do a search is if the officer has a probable cause. Probable cause is a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. Another way is if the officer has a search warrant. And the last way is if you consent. Now, let's think about it. The chances are that at a routine traffic stop, officers don't have a warrant. They don't have probable cause. They've just stopped you only for a traffic violation. And people rarely drive around with illegal objects in plain view. Therefore, the only way to search your car or your belongings is if you consent. You have a constitutional right under the Fourth Amendment to refuse to give consent to searches. However, officers would rarely ask Do you consent to a search? Instead, they often trick people into giving consent by saying, "You don't mind if I look into your car?" Or, "Can you open the trunk for me? May I look into your backpack?" They also make these questions sound more like a command, so people would comply. Officers don't have to tell you about your right to refuse searches. So if you are confronted with a request for search, you have to say, "Officer, I don't give consent to any search." Even if you're convinced 100% that you have nothing to hide and you've done nothing wrong, don't give consent to a search. You don't know if a family member or a friend or even a previous owner of the car has left some illegal stuff behind. Don't take any chances. Rule number 8. How to end the encounter. After you refuse to give consent to any searches, you should ask the officer loudly and clearly so that it could be heard and it could be recorded if you are free to go. Detentions are voluntary unless you ask if you are free to go. So you should ask, "Officer, am I free to go?" If he says yes, leave in a normal manner, meaning don't run. Rule number 9. What if the officer says you can't go? If the officer says, "No, you are not free to go," it means you're being detained. In such a situation, you should say loudly and clearly, loud enough to be heard, clear enough to be recorded, "Officer, I'm going to remain silent, and officer, I would like to see a lawyer." Remember, staying quiet is not enough. You have to invoke your right. You have to state it clearly, not tentatively, like, "Oh, gee, maybe I should see a lawyer," or "Maybe I should stay silent," or "Maybe it's not a bad idea to see a lawyer." No, you have to make a proper invocation of your rights. "Officer, I'm going to remain silent. Officer, I would like to see a lawyer." Rule number 10. Don't incriminate yourself. Officers typically say things will be much easier if you cooperate and talk. Even if you think you've done nothing wrong, even if you think you have nothing to hide, don't talk. You don't know the law, and when you talk under pressure, with purest of the intentions, you might say things that are conflicting, and before you know it, you'll find yourself lying to the police, which is a crime in and of itself. Every year, many routine traffic stops turn into serious criminal charges against people who didn't invoke their rights. If you don't want to be a part of this unfortunate statistic, always express your rights. Officers would think twice before overstepping their legal boundaries when dealing with an individual who knows how to use his or her rights. God bless America.